calling it a movement because if I look back to the 18th century and a little bit that members of your faith have told me, it's more a movement than a church, which resonates a little bit with my spiritual home of the IPHC, which is not a church but more an institution, more of a kingdom movement than a church. What we have in common is that we both see our faiths as a way of life rather than just coming to worship. What is secondarily and importantly in common is that we worship also on the Sabbath. So we observe Sabbath from Friday sunset until yesterday sunset. What is different is that we have a three-dimensional perspective to our faith. We have a Judaic dimension to our faith, and that's why we carry the Star of David on our lapels. We also are African by character of our faith. That's why we are polygamous. And thirdly, unlike Orthodox Jews, we accept Christ as the Son of God and not just as a rabbi. But from your system of beliefs that are articulated on your public documents, the one that I thought is important for today to link this talk to is the one on stewardship. Because I found it quite interesting that it says that we are God's stewards, entrusted by Him with time and opportunities. In my faith, we move, among other things, from the fact that in God's universe, nothing is ever an occurrence of chance. God's intentions are always on time, and they're also time-driven. It's just that we miss the timing, and then often either get impatient or find ourselves in a state of dissonance with His timing. But most importantly, is that we have a duty, as your statement on stewardship suggests, to ensure that we apply, perhaps receive, apply, and redistribute, I'm choosing my words very carefully, the blessings of the earth and its resources. So I'm not going to teach you about your system of beliefs, but I just wanted to say that I wanted to know that I'm going to anchor a little bit on that. But the world is not ruled by Christians or believers. The world is not led commercially and otherwise purely by Christians and believers. The world is secular, and the world is in a state of challenge right now. As we meet, the world is what we call, in an environment of doing business, in a VUCA and Bani world. I don't know if there's anybody from the field of strategy here. That's one of the fields of passion for me that my career evolved around. In this VUCA Bani world, I'll unpack this later, but just for those who've got anxious, impatient minds, VUCA is an acronym for a world that is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. So the common view among fellow strategists in the world is that until the pandemic, we were in the VUCA environment. We've been in the VUCA environment since the Second World War. We're kind of in a Third World War with this Ukraine story. But since the Second World War, the world has been in VUCA. So VUCA actually emerged out of Desert Storm when the US went for the first time into the Middle East with huge resources. But the pandemic shifted us out of the VUCA world, for most strategists, out of the VUCA world into the Bani world. I think we're in a hybrid of VUCA Bani. Bani is not Bani Chao. Bani is an acronym for brittle, anxious, non-linear world. And so I'll talk a little bit about this shortly. But to anchor this journey towards how we need to navigate business in this VUCA Bani world, I thought I'd reflect with you some favorite tools that I never leave home without. The first is, in 31 years, I've been asked many questions around what is a leader. And the definition that I've adopted along my career comes from Joel Barker. He's a futurist. In 1999, he published a piece of work called Leadership, which later became a book. And there he defines a leader as someone you choose to follow to a place that you wouldn't go by yourself. And the reason you choose to follow this leader is because the place that you wouldn't go by yourself largely is in the aspects of the VUCA. Businesses, leadership occur in a business leadership. And so as a result, you generally wish someone was there to lead you so that you would rather follow, because not for the faint-hearted to lead in a complex, uncertain universe. So it is the uncertainty and complexity that also bedevils the world of anybody trying to achieve anything, especially if you're trying to achieve success in business, and I guess yourselves, for your members, as you try to get them to thrive through being members of a common faith, trying to engage with business from your platform. The other tool that I found useful to make sense of this VUCA Bunny world, there's a Dutchman based in INSEAD called Manfred Ketz de Vries, who 2-3 decades ago, 2.5 decades to be precise, published an article called Leaders on the Couch. He's a psychosocial analyst. He teaches leadership and human behavior at INSEAD. And that article evolved over time into a book. Itself, the article became a book called Leaders on the Couch, but the sequel to that was The Neurotic Organization. And so there's 2 titles in these books. There's The Neurotic Organization and there's Leaders on the Couch. Both of them come from the premise that leaders, any leader to succeed, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're in a 27,000 strong NetBank employees, or whether you're leading 5 people, you've got to be in touch with your sense of neurosis. All of us have neurotic tendencies. And he unpacks them into 5 categories. And he says it's important to know your neurosis. And by extension, it's important to have a sense of self-mastery of yourself. So even if you look at it in simple terms, I also do limited executive coaching, I must underline up front. I only have time to coach 5 people a year at this point. But whether you use any profiling tool, the Enneagram, one of other tools that I use is the Human Pin Code, fundamentally, if you don't understand yourself, your journey of success becomes a mere fluke, hit and miss. And fundamentally, and that's why I coach few people, because people run away. The first session I have with people is, why are you here on earth? And then people say, oh, big question. Why are you asking me this big question? All I came was just requested you to be a coach. I said, no, I can't coach you until we agree why you're here on earth. We're not here on earth by accident. And some of the tools I use help unearth that. And so until we are purposeful, until you've articulated your own purpose, it becomes difficult to expect others to trust you to lead them. So you must confront your demons. You must confront whatever is bedeviling your inner self. At the interpersonal level, we live in the TikTok world, Facebook world, Twitter world, and all that this world happened is that in 1999, when some of you who may have been as young as I was 29 at the time, some may remember something called Y2K. There was this notion that come 31st December 1999, computers were going to stop because there was something in their programming that meant that they couldn't click into 2000. And so because of that, there was a view that the world could see a catastrophe, a third world war even, in 2000. But the thing that has changed really is that we saw a shift from people being communal. They gave me this fancy thing to use to point. There's supposed to be a laser pointer somewhere, but nevertheless, I'll use my mouse. You see my arrow? Yeah. The world shifted from being communal. And what this means is that in your cases that are here, mostly, you're sitting here possibly, because your forebearers were Seventh-day Adventists. I stand where I stand, having shared with you my faith, because 2 generations in my family are IPHC. I'm 3rd generation IPHC. My children are 4th generation IPHC. In the white community, if I pick on the Afrikaners, until 1999 it was very easy. When you engage with Afrikaner friends and associates, they would belong to one of 2 faiths. They would either be gereformeerde or hervormde. So pretty much like Protestants versus Catholic. And so we were communal and we thrived communally because people just followed the footsteps of their forebearers. What 2000 and the 21st century did is that the world moved from homogeneity to diversity. If you want to thrive as an entrepreneur, if you want to thrive as a leader, as an individual, your personal networks must be as colorful as those dots. Don't hang out merely with fellow Seventh-day Adventists. Don't hang out merely with those that you went to whatever school with, or people who speak your language. I always fight with my Nguni friends, either they speak Xhosa, Zulu, or any of the Nguni languages. They will tell you, I've been in Joburg for 20 years, and they can't utter a word in Sotho. And I say to them, I lived in Ongoye for 3 years and I speak fluent Zulu. There's something wrong with your mindset if you are just going to stick to your own, in my humble view. Also, what has happened is that people have shifted from blind faith to reasoned faith. What was generally taboos that don't get done or spoken about, people do them freely now. You can think of anything that is sacred in your church. Chances are, if I go onto Facebook, TikTok, I'm going to find someone making fun of it or exposing it when it's supposed to be sacred. And it's simply that people are suddenly finding their faiths being tested. So in some instances, what is sacred in the Christian faith is not sacred in the Hindi faith. But those of you who've got Hindi friends know that you can't say to your Hindi friend, holy cow, because the cow is sacred in Hindi faith. If you're speaking to an Orthodox Jew, you can't say, yeah, no, so we're all good, we're kosher, right? You can't, meaning we're all good. Can't, it's sacrilege. So there are many such examples I'm sure you can think in your mind as I speak that either you use yourself without knowing, and so diversity and inclusion, which your fellow congregant Ninemulifi is a specialist in, is very crucial in these times that we live in. Don't just be limited to your narrow universe. Be curious about other people's worlds, because this is not just complex, but just so diverse a universe that we live and work in. And so when you assess what is happening in the world, what is happening in South Africa, another tool that helps to apply your mind in, this is a whole presentation on its own, is systems thinking. Everything is interrelated. The climate change activists conscientized us that when a butterfly flaps its wing in the Amazon, the rest of the universe gets affected. So anything that changes, anything that surprises, you look at it through the lens of an iceberg. Iceberg theory teaches us that we get trapped with dealing with things at the top, at the events level, the events that present themselves to you. So the most spoken about event is the dollars from the Phala Phala farm. And the problem with the quality of conversation about that is that we're not asking ourselves what lies beneath the iceberg. What are the patterns in the governing party? What are the patterns in this country? What are the structures that present me with Phala Phala? Because if you analyze beneath the surface, you start seeing the Phala Phala thing differently. Several scenarios suddenly play in front of you. So a friend of mine, Louis van der Merwe, that I met along this journey, incidentally I was introduced to Louis by Nini Mlifi when I was in the Department of Labor in 1996. Louis runs the Center for Innovative Leadership. He's a scenario thinking practitioner, so I learned scenario thinking from Louis, and later at Sterling did a few modules on that. So systems thinking, borrowing from his website, says looking at the world from a systemic point of view helps you uncover causal relationships, and that's the key thing I want to emphasize. So don't just focus on the narrow thing that is presenting itself to you at the events level. Try and unpack cause effect beneath the surface that is making this event bubble. Then you will find that you will deal with these problems holistically. With time and Q&A, we can go into deeper details. I don't mean to be controversial, but it's also important when we deal with setting up business forums like yours and ours and doing all sorts of things in particularly this country, you need to be aware of the fact that there's something about the official mindset that is governing South Africa. It has always been dominated by baby boomer leaders since 1999. So the generations silence, these are Madiba's generation, GI generation, children that were raised during the First World War. The silence are children who emerged after the Second World War or in the middle of the Second World War. And then you get the baby boomers who were raised between 1942 and around 1960. Then you get Gen X between 1961 and 81. The generations got shorter with time because of the fast pace of change in technology. After Gen X in 81, you get Gen Y between 82 and 1999. There's a debate about whether it's 90 or 99. Then you get the millennials by virtue of being born at the turn of the century between 1999. So they tend to go over cycles of 10 to 20 years. Since Madiba, who was a GI baby, we've skipped the silence, so we didn't get to have a head of state who's a silent. We had GI, and then I'm talking about the new South Africa. We had GI in Madiba, then we skipped silent and went straight to baby boomer. And we've been led by baby boomers until now. We are yet to see what will happen if the political system were to present us with a Gen X leader. Now the challenge is, if you listen to all these slates that are doing the rounds, consistently more and more baby boomers are surfacing. Where are the Gen Xers? Why is it that Gen Xers are not surfacing? This is a question I always ask myself. So that is the first question that, as you launch this forum, you're going to have to think about a lot. Because remember I said in South Africa generally, you can't avoid doing business with government. Because why is this relevant? Back to those dots. The power network in South Africa is essentially a baby boomer power network. So if you're born in post 1960 and you wonder why you don't have the strongest network, why are you not sitting side by side with CR and NDZ? Sorry, you're not a baby boomer. And so back to my dots, it means if you want to thrive in this country, you must have baby boomer friends in your network. Because how does life work? There's a book that someone once published that I came across at Kellogg called 6 Degrees of Separation. At business school, they taught us this module on networking. That sitting where we are today, if any of you wanted to have breakfast with CR17 one of these days, you are 6 degrees removed from him. There's someone you know who knows someone who knows someone who knows someone who can put a word in his ear that you'd like to meet him. And that's why networking is so powerful. And that's why you've got to understand these generational dynamics, because sometimes you may ask yourself, why am I not penetrating certain avenues of success? It is simply that you have not stopped to analyze the veracity of your personal network, the robustness thereof relative to where you wish to be. And so in South Africa, if you want to be somewhere in this cobweb of South African politics, somewhere in your network there must be a baby boomer that is networked with the inner circle. Without that, you'll constantly be wandering, and you'll constantly be left out of those networks. The other thing that I think is important, and excuse the small font, but on the website you'll be able to see it. I've included the website there. It's, you can either say Indlamiti 2030 or SA Scenarios 2030.co.za. Last year with the riots, again, I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but if you watch, if you follow their website, there's an invite later this week. They are launching the barometer for 2022. It's worth following. This is why it's worth following. Nothing, as I said, happens per chance. The Indlamiti scenarios are premised on 3 scenarios. The high road scenario, if you like, is the Nile walk. So it's a scenario where we're all having this grand walk of economic prosperity and political harmony and all the good things. And the middle road scenario is the Isbujo scenario. It's where the chosen few from either of those networks that I was talking about manage to lead and keep networks going, but it's not, which is what is get lamented in South Africa. Few benefit, majority are left behind. The third scenario is the Gwara Gwara scenario, the flaunting walk scenario. And the riots last year, this time, if you've forgotten, we had the great riots, as some people call them, coincided with the release of the 2021 barometer, and it confirmed that the reason we had the riots is because South Africa's official scenario last year, the barometer found that we were 52% Gwara Gwara. We were literally floundering. And therefore, everybody's watching to see where the barometer is going to tell us we are. I'm sure your guess is as good as mine. I think it's going to say we're still in Gwara Gwara, because we can't quantum leap from Gwara Gwara July 21 and suddenly, miraculously, in 22 be in the Nile walk or in Isbujo. But we do have a hybrid of Nile walk and Isbujo. So what does this mean? So I'm just going to pick on my generation. Someday we can talk about other generations. So as a Gen Xer, when I look at this, is that in 1994, I'll start in 94 because of where I started with the dominance of the baby boomer. The scenarios could go as far back. If you look at the Gen Xers, people born between 1961 and 1981, in 1994, when democracy happened, when the promise of the new South Africa happened, the oldest were 33 years old, so several of our cabinet ministers then, who they used to be referred to as people who were onto the gravy train. So we had a young Tito Mboweni as a cabinet minister in his 30s. We had a young Trevor Manuel and many others, young Pumzile Ngcuka and many others. Some of us were 23, others were 13. The 33-year-olds, what they had to grapple with in terms of shifting dynamics. For most of them, in terms of property, they had to switch from Yeoville. Yeoville was a thriving place. There were a few coffee shops in Yeoville that we used to hang out with. If you wanted to meet anybody from Shell House, you still remember that place called Shell House? You had to go to Yeoville. And then if you wanted to meet anybody from the BMF, there was always this notion of we'll meet at the top of the Carlton, downtown Joburg. The closest to luxury was to meet at the Balalaika Hotel in Sandton, which today seems to be a non-existent hotel, but it still exists if I look at the other fancy places where people meet now. And these 33-year-olds, for the first time, had to grapple with this notion of their children going to Model C schools. This notion of people being ferried by Kumbis from Diepkloof Extension, from Vosloorus, which is where the 99-year leasehold township suburban suburbs were emerging. Some places in Atteridgeville, some places in Soshanguve, but the pattern was the same. Everybody had to be put on a Kumbi into the school in town. The 23-year-olds like me later that year, or actually in 93, a year prior, we had the privilege of owning a townhouse for the first time, because the Group Areas Act was scrapped late 92, so 93, 94 you could own a townhouse. So we didn't have the burden, because these 99-year lease bonds with the PERM and many of these other building societies, you couldn't just pack up and leave. You've got this 5-bedroomed house. I mean, the most interesting was Advocate Kgang Moseneke had a 5-bedroomed house in Atteridgeville, where he had taken 4 streets and turned them into this big mansion. Couldn't sell to anybody. And so he ended up converting it into the Kgang Moseneke Early Childhood Development School, into a crèche essentially. So you found yourself with this bond, and these 33-year-olds were learning this bond system, this 20-year-old bond, but after 20 years, they were never going to own, they were never going to get a title deed. There was this 99-year leasehold. But these younger ones could enter into a smaller property, and if they paid it off quicker, they would end up with a title deed. So different mindsets, but they had to deal with different challenges. So there's the unlimited choices, first-time parents, and their children went to mixed early childhood centers, unlike those that had to be ferried by public transport into. It creates a certain dynamic, which we can talk about in Q&A. But the 30-year-olds were suddenly entering high school and for the first time having the ability, regardless of privilege, because in the past you only went to a private school if your parents were rich. Now it was a public education system that they were going into, and they were beneficiaries of the first decade of democracy education, with very few limitations, almost limitless. Then fast forward later to 2014, the 33-year-olds became 53-year-olds. Now they were elders of society. Madiba's tenure had left, so now this scenario resonates with this scenario. Because in this scenario, I always tell my baby boomer friends, you messed up our country. because everywhere I have stepped onto after a baby boomer, something had changed. Those of you who are my age, people used to get company cars. They used to get all sorts of things. As we step onto the platter, they say, no, the tax system has changed. Now you get a subsidy or you get an allowance. It's not the same. Whatever benefits they had seemed to always end as we stepped onto the platter. And it's largely because as these VUCA complexities were starting to kick in, different social dynamics, socio-economic dynamics started being at play. So the 53-year-olds found that now they were the generation of elders in 2014. But there's something about baby boomers and Gen Xers. Baby boomers are a rebellious bunch. Because remember, in the UK, in the US, in the Northern Hemisphere, they are children of Woodstock and all these hippie, dope-smoking folks that used to just rebel against everything, really. And in South Africa, they are the children of Sophiatown. They're the generation of 76. What they all have in common, besides being rebellious, they are shy to apply discipline on their children. I'm sorry if I'm talking ill about your parents. They are shy to apply it, so they always had this notion that they could negotiate with their children. And sadly, along the way, messed up society. The Gen Xers had to be the peacemakers in between these generations of the emerging younger ones in the Gen Xer bracket and the older ones that had to figure out these complexities of this new dispensation. And so that's why in our balancing effect, we always find that as we balance things, the baby boomers have changed the dispensation, something else crops up, something else crops up. I don't have anything negative against them, but they certainly left us with a daunted legacy. Even now, all of state capture is about baby boomers. Think about it. The key players, the key accused, the key whatever of state capture are baby boomers. Here and there, they pulled along Gen Xers that were in their cobweb. But fundamentally, the people who were really the masterminds, baby boomers. So in 2014, as we were celebrating this milestone of democracy after 94, the 43-year-olds suddenly found that some of them were young achievers, but they were not fully recognized as the new elders of the formal economy because there's this shadow of the baby boomer dominance. Because remember, I told you our problem in this country is this baby boomer shadow. And so this meant that this second tier of Gen Xers could never really take over the reins of leading society. Even today, when you look at all these slates that are going out in the provinces, there's a baby boomer shadow somewhere. We can talk about that in detail. It's now left to the 33-year-olds, but the 33-year-olds got caught in being master Twitters and all these social media things that we're all caught up with Facebook. And sadly, they became a vanity generation. And they inspired a vanity generation. If you look at what is being posted right now, I'm sure some of you are looking at your Instagrams as we speak. People are posting about the party they were at and what dress they were wearing or what suit they were wearing or whatever they were wearing and what champagne, expensive champagne they were drinking. Nothing about progress of society. And so that's the dilemma we face. I wish Instagram was dominated about ideas on how to make society move forward. It's a vanity platform. Now, if we look 2 years ahead into 2024, those who will be 63 in 2 years' time, because 60 is retirement as you'll be in Sasa land, the thing that's going to keep you awake at night if you're in that bracket is what is my credible legacy? What is it really, as a retiree, have I contributed to society? What is going to keep me awake at night is being haunted by the effects of the Gora Gora scenario and what is my role as an elder in helping to undo. Those of you who are 10 years younger than me, what is going to keep you awake at night is being part of solutions for the resilience and recovery of not just South Africa, but the rest of the world. And so, if Lord was in the room, he would use the word quo vadis. What then? So, we need to all acquire skills to learn how to lead in this VUCA context firstly, because the complexity requires that you always make decisions taking into account multiplicity of factors. It means that you must understand. So often people in organizations talk about risks and change. If in your conversations you're not talking about change velocity and risk velocity, you are not yet talking about change. COVID-19 taught us that if you look at any boardroom, they had COVID-19 as a strategic risk. Because someone told us in December 2019 that there's this disease coming out of China. And we thought it was going to be just like the Asian flu. I remember that I was in the US in January 20, and then also in March 20. And it was just like before March 20, I was in the US. I was on one of the last few flights to come back in a rush. And it was just Donald Trump told us it's some disease from China. And so what everybody missed in their strategic radars was at what pace, at what velocity will this risk become a global problem. So when you start a business today, or if you're an entrepreneur today, don't just say, no, it's me and my customers. The Ukraine war taught us that supply chains are all intertwined. COVID taught us everything is now intertwined. So you can never just say it's just me and my small universe. Learn to do as you've been doing in big boardrooms, do for your business. To say, how well, in terms of the left that exists, how well can I predict some of the challenges that I'm seeing? And how much do I know about the challenges? And aim to add more pluses in terms of enhancing your knowledge thereof than just relying on what you're seeing on NCA. And by the way, those of you who are NCA addicts, NCA, it just talks about what gets spoken in the middle class and upper middle class. They never really go to the ground. You must still go to good old radio. Most importantly, good old Venek radio. Listen to whatever Venek radio you listen to at least twice a day, because you'll get the real picture of what's happening on the ground, unlike if you just rely on 702 and ENCA and all these other high-level stuff. So what am I saying to you as I start drawing to a close? If I fail to tell you anything today, allow me to just accentuate this. You need to master, this is how mindsets are formed. You need to master this equation. This equation says, the quality of assumptions you make about the problem before you, or the strategic challenge before you, in a very natural way will shape the quality of engagements that you will have with yourself or with each other if you're part of a team. And it will reinforce the quality of your thinking. And once your quality of thinking is reinforced, it reinforces your universal truths. And part of your universal truths comes from that menu of the beliefs. So as you embrace those beliefs, what it means to be an Adventist, constantly ask yourself, are we ensuring that because the beliefs are permanent, but our living of them and the application thereof is what must be dynamic. And therefore constantly test your assumptions. Constantly challenge each other. Is the quality of conversation we're having in sync with the quality of assumptions? Poor assumptions means we're going to have a poor quality of conversation. If we're too polite with each other, because often in faith systems, that's what we do. There's a sense of looking at those with some authority, with reverence, be they pastors, priests, whatever. There's a way of having respectful engagement. Cultivate a way of having respectful engagement, where you stretch the quality of assumptions, stretch the quality of conversation so that you enrich the quality of the thinking. Because if the quality of the thinking is enriched, it means there's a rich mindset. And therefore, whatever you endorse as the universal truth is to be right or wrong, is premised on a rich mindset. Stretch your leadership capabilities, because the bunny world, the brittle, anxiety, non-linear, the thing I find in large corporations, in the boardrooms and in excos, we talk about being resilient, pandemic resilient and so on. But the people that have to inspire the troops have run out of things to say to people to make them resilient. Because every day they are confronted with people. The bunny world, the brittle thing made us all, from any powerful person in the world, whether they're sitting in the White House or Union Buildings or at Nedbank campus or wherever. Everybody realized that we're all vulnerable, we're brittle, we're breakable. COVID told us that. We are breakable. And the losses have been countless. I'm sure each one of us can have a moment of silence with ourselves and we'll remember a close relative, a friend that we lost to the pandemic. It told us that we are breakable. And therefore, you need as an individual to constantly find ways to keep yourself resilient. You need to be purpose-driven. A lot of people I know in my network say, I almost faced death. Now every day I'm much more circumspect in terms of what I do with my time. There's loads and loads of anxiety in all the systems, anywhere in the world, private, public sector. Which means if you're an entrepreneur, you need to constantly figure out how do I inspire people, but from a platform of compassion. But don't rather choose brutal optimism over brutal honesty. Some of my colleagues, one of Bonang Mohale's favorite expressions is we must be brutally honest. It permeated in the BMF over many years. Rather than being brutally honest, because people are fragile, choose to rather be brutally optimistic. Rather than going down a vanity lane on Instagram, rather choose to post positive things that inspire people. The world is non-linear. We've learned now that you cannot predict in 2 days' time where you will be, because we now see, even with our own SAP dealing with inflation, it's not a South African inflation, it's global inflation problem. So it calls for agility. In your personal space, you need to be robust and constantly say, what do I cut back to stay in budget? You can't say, no, maybe next month I'll earn this. No, you just have to be ruthless and say, what do I cut back to constantly stay below the line of affordability? And you've got to constantly adapt. Constantly look at what do I need to be on top of. Constant adaptation. Be happy if you don't have all the answers. One of the most important skills leaders have learned to learn during the pandemic is very important words. I don't know. Because leaders used to be shy. You're chairman of the board, you're CEO of the company. You're expected to have answers. It's okay to say, I don't know. Because the wisdom might just be in the room. Yes, you need to be strong for others, you need to be brave for others, but half the time feel good saying, I don't know, because you'll just be surprised the solutions that may just surface in the room. But the important thing for leaders is to always make sense and always seek collaboration. And so, we've spoken about stewardship. As you reflect on stewardship, and given that we are African after all, majority of us in this room are African, Eric Mafuna did work with us at ESCOM when we were coming in as new directors of a commercialized ESCOM in 2002. Ruel Khoza was chair of the board at the time, and we commissioned work on African leadership and the dilemmas that I've spoken about of what makes other South African groupings seem to succeed relative to others. So volumes and volumes were published. Mafuna, if you visit him, he's got a volume on what he thinks makes the Jewish community tick, what makes the Hindu community tick, and many other communities tick. But what I took from that work is that if you were to ask me in modern terms today, what is the meaning of African leadership relative to also what your faith says is stewardship? It's constellar leadership. Leaders must realize that what African leadership taught us is that leaders are like being part of a constellation, a galaxy. What's important is not for one star to spark. What's important is for one star to say, how do I make the community spark? And for me, that's the question you raised about spiderweb economy. How do I make the community spark? How do I make sure that I remember that I'm not bigger than all of us? I may be the shining star amongst us, but I'm not bigger than all of us. In BMF, we used to say, lift as you rise. Don't climb the ladder and pull the ladder behind you so that nobody else can climb. Because what used to happen, sadly, in this phase, people were very happy, especially among those 33-year-olds, to say, I'm the first woman to do this. I'm the first black person to do this. I'm the first this, I'm the first this. And sadly, some of them, that mindset destroyed them and the people around them. And so our biggest opportunity and challenge is to practice, how do I make sure, I don't know if you sing this chorus in your faith. When I was younger in our church, we used to sing a chorus called Bright in the Corner Where You Are. That's the challenge. And with that, I thank you. Gajeni, you said we would do Q&A, so let's help me facilitate the Q&A. Oh, there's a roving mic. Questions, comments? Are you VUCA banned?
Let me start. It's always difficult to be the first one to ask the question, so right. You spoke about the 6 degrees of separation, and one of the things that we are trying to accomplish is to create a platform where the up-and-coming business people can actually share a table with those who are established. Can you share some insights on how maybe you've gotten it right in your organization, or where you've seen it also work in maybe other structures?
In our organization, I'll defer to my brothers who are here with me. We've always been blessed to, starting with our founder, the comforter, F.S. Modise. We've always been blessed that even he was 1914, he was a GI generation. But he always saw fit to have youngsters around him and the various leadership platforms. I'm one of those beneficiaries as a very young person. Somehow I was trusted to do certain things that probably I shouldn't have been trusted with at 21. And so you've got to deliberately create space for young people to have expression. I would say that's the first thing. In the commercial environment, I remember having this discussion in the early 90s with Alan Nott-Craig when Vodacom, I think it was Vodacom, yes, before it became Vodafone. When Vodacom was set up, Wendiluhag was chair, Alan Nott-Craig was CEO, and he used to make this point that he, as CEO, always insisted on having 5 or so 25-year-olds in his office. They would be taken on as trainees, they would be taken on as whatever, interns, but he would spec what qualifications they must have on the principle of between Lot Ndlovu and many other BMF colleagues I've worked with, we inherited from Lot. In fact, it was Prof. Nkuhlu who articulated this. When he was made president of the BMF, he did not come from the traditions of the BMF. And so there was big hoo-ha about, he's not even a BMF veteran, why is he being made president of the organization? And between the two of them, Lord was the executive director, between the two of them they said, look, if you want to thrive, always go out of your way to find leaders to lead you that don't think like you do, that know what you don't know. And at that time, Prof, being the first black CASA in South Africa, brought solid financial acumen that was much needed into the BMF, among other things. A very staunch Africanist at the time who had been to Robben Island, very strong from a Pan-Africanist point of view, brought lots of that quality of thinking into the BMF. So you could go out of your way to find an elder and a young person that has this type of calibers that you deliberately infuse into your working committees. I know in a church environment it's different because they would have to submit to those beliefs of what it means to be an Adventist in your case. In our case, you have to submit to our beliefs that I've said earlier are 3-dimensional. So the principle is you have to be deliberate about it. And it takes us back to those colorful dots about being deliberate about what network you create around yourself. You've got to, I challenge all of you, go and look now at your Facebook friends. Go and look at your, what else, on your LinkedIn. Just do an exercise. Assess for yourself how diverse it is. And I bet most of us are going to find it's not. So it's those little things that are relevant today. You need to have ways to create those opportunities for you to be subjected to. It doesn't mean they have to sway you into their way of thinking. You can still be who you are, but you need to be world savvy. You need to be streetwise. You need to be culture-wise, and many other things wise. I don't know if the master of the spider web has anything to add to the question. That's his bread and butter. He goes around the country doing talks on these things.
Thank you, Priest Makwana, Linda Ndlovu. Yeah, you've pretty much covered everything that I think we will need more time to dwell into details so that we can break it down. But over and above everything, it all boils back to those thoughts. You've got to have that balance. When they started with the business forum at church, as Mpho Makwana has just alluded, he was about 21. And when our bishop then, Ndate F.S. Modise, instructed them to start a youth development structure, which was called the NYEC, they then saw it fit to go and look for the young ones. And at the time, some of us were still in high school. So they developed leadership structures from, at the regional level, branch level, right into the high school level. So it was easy for us to access them and to start, sharpening our thinking and aligning our thinking with what the church is all about and the direction that it's taking. So I started interacting with Mpho Makwana when I was 18, 19, when I arrived at varsity. We were part of the PMF Young Professionals, and I got that influence from him. So I'm just trying to add that it's very important to have that balance. So in my midst, I've had them, and we've also had access to others who were above them, and now we've created space for the young ones which are coming into our forum. So that a part where you concentrate on thoughts, and we also being motivated and encouraged to always go outside. Be part of the PMFs, be part of enactors. There's a lot of forums where you are going to engage with different people from different spheres, different career paths, and that's how you grow and learn. So that's why I'm saying we'll have time, and then we'll unpack it and then get deeper. Tango.
Any other questions?
Thank you so much, sir. My question, again, maybe it stems to what my elder said there as well. Not all of us definitely will have the privilege of being in the circles of the CRs of this world. However, in the corporations that we work in as well, and as you speak about transformation, BE also is a tool, that could be leveraged in order to unearth these opportunities. And I just want you to touch on the elements of socio-economic development, look at ED as well as SED. How do we then tap, into those avenues in order to create these small businesses for ourselves?
I used to run public affairs in retail at Edcon in the middle of the first decade of the 2000s. Firstly, I think I would say, as a young person that wants to access those ED networks and those high-level networks, you cited CR as an example, you need to start doing personal branding early in life. So I've got my brother here. He's a master communicator who's also helping me with my own personal branding. Maybe he can help you with yours. But the key thing is be careful about how you show up on social media, point number one. So your LinkedIn profile must be professionally designed. Don't be blasé about it. There's so many books now on Amazon and other forums that teach you how to do a professionally attractive LinkedIn profile. So that when people search certain keywords, they find you quicker. Secondly, be very deliberate about your Facebook page. Post less of the holiday scenes. Post less of the TikTok type scenes. And post more around, because some employers now, fairly or unfairly, they use Facebook as part of reputation background checking. So if they find you with a dual thing, of course, everybody has a multiple identity. They find on your CV saying, I'm a devout Seventh-day Adventist. And then your Facebook shows you doing your thing, saying, they start wondering about your staunch Seventh-day Adventism. So people need to be a bit more circumspect in terms of what you post about yourself on those platforms. Thirdly, people engage with people because you stand for something. So when you create a Twitter page or a Twitter handle, make it stand for something in terms of what you tweet. Lastly, have a personal website where you articulate certain things about what you stand for, and have a long-term view about them. Because in the long term, some of the things you articulate must become programs or actionables. There's a young person that many people, young people tell me is worth always paying attention to, called Malaika wa Azania. She's cited as an example of a young person that understood this early. And then there's also another young person, her surname is Kumalo, forgetting his, I think it's Zamatungwa. Kumalo, she's currently at Harvard as we speak. And a lot of people that I know, my peers, follow her just out of interest because she seems to always have something interesting to say. So, but understand early in life, in your 30s, that your digital footprint must stand for something. Because that's how you're going to attract people, traffic into the personal website, into your Twitter. For instance, if you tweet something meaningful, all the key spokespersons of the powerful people are on Twitter. Chances are they'll notice you. And the question is, how do you want to be noticed? So if the president delivers the SONA, you can imagine a lot of people are going to focus on the SONA debate. So rather than 140 characters that say how boring or whatever it may be, try and figure out from your authentic level, don't try and be something that you're not. From your authentic level of understanding, articulate back to say, this is what I took out from the SONA, and tag CR17. You might think, oh gee, am I dreaming now? But actually, it's not him personally, his spokesperson is going to read it. Because how is CR17 going to pay attention to you? It's when his spokesperson says, there's this young person, so-and-so. She always tweets about what you do in this way and this way. I think when we do program XYZ, maybe it's someone you must talk to. She may not be an ANC member, but she seems to have good thoughts. There are many people in government that are not necessarily cadres. When I got into government, certainly yes, I had an advocacy responsibility at the BMF, but I remember someone saying they were at a function with Tito, who was Minister of Labor at the time. And he had heard me speak somewhere, but pretended not to pay attention. And then later, he found that on behalf of the BMF this time, I was systematically tackling some of the key issues he was raising from an equity point of view and a skills development. And he said to a fellow ANC cabinet minister who knew me, he says, who's this young person? You know, they're always commenting on things that I do. I must have coffee with them. And then someone tried to get us to have coffee, but before we knew it, a position was advertised that I applied for that then got us to sit face-to-face because he was the chair of the selection panel. And that's how we got to know each other closely. So if you look at, I used to run a column on Business Day called Leadership and Nation Building in my early 30s. It was published in Business Day. And it forced me every fortnight to put 1,200 words together about leadership and nation building. And at the time, it was largely professional reflections, but somehow I found myself in corridors I never thought I could get into. In your professions, as a chartered accountant, as a lawyer, as whatever, get involved with those associations. Because the world revolves around thought leadership. What's going to make people attract you into those personal networks without you asking is if they think you're a thought leader about something that they are interested in. So those are some of the techniques that I think one can apply. A hand right at the back. Two hands at the back.
Good morning, everyone.
Hi
It's
there.
still morning. Oh, afternoon. Yeah. I just want to thank Mpho Makwana. Thank you so much for availing yourself to be part of the launch. But most importantly, 2014, when the former Minister of Finance, Ntate Tito Mboweni, got Twitter, I was one of the few people that he started following. And you emphasize something important about your digital presence. It's quite important. And we spoke in the DMs. And then I said to him, I want you to mentor me. I was a still upcoming entrepreneur at that time. And he referred me to you. And 2 weeks later, we met at the Design Quarter at 4 Ways. I don't know if you remember that scenario. The first thing that you gave me as a task, a big task. And you said to me that you don't usually mentor people for free, but you'll do something about it. And you mentioned something important about knowing your identity, and you recommended a book by Douglas Forbes, The Human Pin Code. I think it's something that I would also recommend to people. Unfortunately, I couldn't get that book. I must confess that I couldn't get that book, but it was quite difficult. I couldn't find it on the bookshelves, but it spoke about identity and strengths and weaknesses of a person, and also understanding the archetypes. And I had to go through different videos and whatnot. What's the importance of identity as entrepreneurs, as business people? That's my first question. What's the importance of understanding your identity? I'm saying this because from the time when we met, I was Ramoroga. Today I'm Phala. So I took my surname, my father's surname, and last year I was officially with the Department of Home Affairs named Phala. I think in our meeting we spoke about understanding your roots as an African and as a person. So my follow-up question to that one would be understanding your African identity as a person, and how is it linked to business? Because I think starting to use my father's surname, a lot of business opportunities started opening up. I don't know if there's actually any spiritual significance or African significance to identity and business. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ndet. Firstly, the Human Pin Code is available at Books Galore. For some reason, people read it and then sell it. Books Galore is a second-hand bookstore. Books Galore tends to stock it. As you can see, it's not showing on your screen, there's so many reminders telling me I've got to be on my way to a 1 o'clock engagement. But I don't practice ancestry worship, but I was taught at a very young age to understand the importance of my heritage. And that's why my personal website is line3.co.za. As a Makwana, I'm a descendant of people who are from generations of custodians. Our family totem is the lion, so we carry the lion spirit with us. That's what I was taught at a young age. Later, by fluke, I stumbled onto a book written about that, the spirituality and role of the lion spirit. So how I practice my brand of leadership, it's about being a trusted counselor to those that I engage with. because I understand what it means both in my mortal existence to carry the lion spirit, but also in my spiritual sense. The lapel I'm wearing, the staff David, is inspired by King David being the Lion King of Judah. But that's conversation for another time. But the basic thing is that Africans understood personal branding before the West could tell us about personal branding. So among the Botswana, you'd hear people saying they're the Bakwena. A lot of them follow it largely from an ancestral link to say their ancestral spirits always come to them through the water. But in leadership term, if you're a Mokoena, it simply means one thing, that you're supposed to be a thick-skinned leader. So if you separate the ancestral worship thing to the brand of the crocodile, it stands for thick-skinned nature. And so the problem today, or the challenge today, back to the cross-generational dynamics, is that most baby boomers, out of this rebelliousness, people who are supposed to be Rakgadi abandoned their responsibilities as Rakgadi. Because I know what I know because of my both maternal and paternal grandmothers, but also because my Rakgadis also infused what those that came before them, what it means to be a Moroka, what it means to carry the lion totem. Because Rakgadi in African traditions means disciplinarian. Rakgadi, the one who rebukes. Malome, the one who bites. So Malome carries the cane, and Rakgadi carries the words that rebuke or build. So those sitting in the room, millennials, Gen Ys, and a few people that look like Gen Xers in the room, go and consult your Rakgadis and your Malumes and see whether they know these things. And I bet you're going to find a lot of them don't, because they've been rebelling against them. But within your spiritual beliefs as a Seventh-day Adventist, you have to find that which resonates with you spiritually. With me, I've had to discard anything ancestral worship related because I don't practice ancestry worship, but I've had to figure out my way in terms of self-branding in line with my heritage. But the pin code model tells us also that the world revolves around an essence of number combinations. This is Douglas Forbes' model. So like now we're in the year 2022, it's a 6 year, which means the essence of 2022, all of you in this room, anybody in the world, whenever they are kept awake at night, they'll be kept awake at night by things about how do I show up in the world, because 6 is about how you show up. Next year is 2023, is a 7 year. A lot of people are going to be kept awake at night by depth. Their sense of depth and sense of spirituality. So if you have not figured it out this year, start doing the homework, because next year is going to haunt you, I can tell you now, without fear of contradiction. So when I coach people around their life purpose, we also look at all those numerical forces that the pin code advises us to think about. Then you overlay other things on top. But in short, an authentic person who understands themselves for who they are. A Brazilian thrives because they know what it means to be Brazilian. A Cuban thrives because they know what it means to be Cuban. And so the narrative goes. Sadly, as we were rebelling against apartheid's separate development and segregation, we ended up rebelling against our own essence. And so the challenge is to go and rediscover the value of your own essence. You know, I come across young children often, and you'll hear a 7-year-old saying, "My name is Tato," and I deliberately ask them, "So what does Tato mean?" And they'll say, "It's just some name my dad gave me." Because the young parents forget that in African tradition, I know why my name is Mpho. I know exactly why. Because my parents invested time and energy to tell us in the family what our different names mean and how it is that we were conceived. So, starting with your name, starting with your surname, starting with your family heritage is very important. Because that's what makes you show up as your authentic self. So, I hope I've answered your question. I've got limited time now. Can I take the two last hands? Then I really have to dash to my 1 o'clock.
Thank you, Program Director. I just wanted to start my question by observing and giving an applause to those who have organized this convocation. I also realize the fact that, the fee which has been requested from us doesn't by far equate the expenses which was incurred for convening such a convocation. And I would like to applaud the people who are organizing this, because this is a long overdue matter. If it has happened before, I beg your pardon. But for me, as far as I'm concerned, this is first of its kind this year. And to you, Elder Mphahlele and Refilwe and Monde, I would like to acknowledge your presence and also your contributions for such a convocation. There is a saying, Mr. Makwana, which says, we all begin to die when we remain silent about the things that matter. And the things that matter around us, the political fractions and the institutional decay which is happening around us, it is happening while we are Seventh-day Adventists. We come here, we worship regularly and professionally so, and we are devoted Christians. And you are saying we need to make the nation spark. We need to make the community spark. How are we going to make the community spark when I am in an ANC gathering and my elder who passes by or someone who passes by find me to be something like at an odd occasion where I shouldn't even be at the time? So we are supposed to graduate to a situation where we don't see a person who is an activist as a person who is by far an Adventist by nature. Professor Ndlovu Kacheni talks about the colonial mentality. So in where we are, we should see a person who's an activist as a true Christian, because this person aspires to brighten the corner where he is, just like you said earlier. So this meeting, I am so happy that it is happening, because as business enterprises, we need to cross-pollinate, Mr. Makwana, and we don't find that space. We come on Sabbath, and you are told, don't discuss business on Sabbath. And when we are supposed to meet on Sunday, but I have my family to attend to, family matters to attend to. So I find this meeting to be very pertinent, to be very relevant, to be very important in our well-being, because we are also talking about prophecy, where we are going to be alienated by the mark of the beast. As Christians, how are we going to operate when we are at that stage? So we really need to take care of each other right now. Before I can take care of a non-Adventist brother, I must take care of yourself here, because you are going to take care of me when business is going to alienate us. That is how important this matter is. Your comments, sir.
Well, I do not have authority to comment on Adventist ways of life. But in my environment, our Sabbath has got various chapters, starting on Friday night until the Saturday night. As we speak to you now, there's many members of our fraternity that are busy throughout Southern Africa with something in some form or shape. I don't want to shock you off your chairs. I've been very gentle with giving you Nestam. Yes, because if I gave you the hard stuff, some of you may either end up divorced or in trouble. We are a polygamous society. Next week, our whole Sabbath is going to be shaped around polygamy. It's a polygamy festivity. In June 16, our whole weekend around June 16, without fail, for now 20 whatever years, since 1991, celebrates education. So there's time to worship on the Sabbath, but thereafter it's still in service to God. So we have people, they don up their academic regalia, we inspire young ones to become educated, because our founder said a member of our society will be deemed uneducated if at least they have a matric. So hence I'm saying I can't address the Adventist part of your question. It's for yourselves to address internally. But anything you do on the Sabbath, Christ healed someone on the Sabbath, and the Orthodox said, why are you healing a person on the Sabbath? So you've got to, for your own doctrines, in line with your own doctrines, do with your Sabbath what you do with. But in our environment, the Sabbath is multifaceted. So that's the best I can do to answer your question, because most of it is out of bounds for me, as I'm not an Adventist.
Thank you, Mr. Makwana. I just want to ask, from a man's perspective and your experience, what do you think as women, our blind spots as women leaders are?
That's also a tough question. I'm going to answer it as best as I can. Just like as black people, we try to be all things to all people, women tend to try to be all things to all people. If you're a Muslim woman, your dress code and everything is expected to be Islamic. Be consistent about being a Muslim woman throughout your life. If you're in our faith, an African Judaic woman, in my household I tell my wives and my daughter to show up as such wherever they are. So firstly, I think the problem is that, you hear a lot of people saying they are feminists. By God, there's a real reason why the one gender is more masculine than the other. It's nature. But if you are going to change a system, like for instance, if a board meeting starts at 7:30, it starts at 7:30 for all of us. You can't have a system that works for day moms, working moms, and for non-working moms. So if you're going to be an FD of a company as a woman, you must appreciate that because you've got a little bit more zeros at the end of your paycheck, it does mean you've got to figure out, together with your significant other, husband, or if you're of same orientation, partner, you've got to figure out that you've got to structure your life in a way that allows you to delegate certain responsibilities so that you show up like any other CFO would show up for a meeting. Because you can't be both. Whereas I find a lot of us try to be both. When I left public employment, formal employment rather, to do what I do is called a portfolio life. So I do a portfolio of things. I'm not in full-time employment. It's because I wanted to be a present father for my children who were in high school. I wanted to make sure I didn't miss a soccer match, a karate tournament, until they finished. They're young adults now. And so I chose not to work full-time and restructured my life. I forwent a few of the perks that go with being a corporate executive, because I had faith that wherever I am, God will provide for me. And He did. So as a woman, firstly, it's not an either or that you must choose whether you're going to be a working mom or not a working mom. It's you aligning yourself with your faith and the forces that give us what we ask for, to say, I'm praying to be in this space because I want to be a present mother and also be a career mother. So perhaps then you set up a consulting firm or a business instead of being a full-time executive. But do understand that in an organization of 27,000 people, in this case, yes, there'll be all those things about reasonable accommodation and all those things to create an equitable environment, but there are certain levels where you can do flexi hours and there are certain environments you can't do flexi hours. So in terms of work ethic, I'm just saying map out your work ethic of success that is going to work from your logic of where you are in life stage. I once went on a trip when I was still in government with the then Minister Mboweni, and it's the contradiction I find in this statement, in this story I'm about to tell. This story is also my parting shot because I'm now dangerously out of time. We went around the country with the labor law roadshows and boarded an SA Express in Mthatha Airport. A few women joined us on that plane. It was in July, August. They had been to a funeral of, it appeared like a stalwart because we didn't ask. But Bishop Dandala was amongst them, and there was another bishop from another faith that was presiding at the graveyard. They were donned in ANC Women's League regalia. And they were saying in Xhosa how that preacher irritated the hell out of them. Kept on telling them that they must prepare for the kingdom of God, it's coming, and blah, blah, blah. And how these preachers are preaching of a God that doesn't exist and so on. And one of them seemed to lean more towards Marxism and negating the existence of God. The plane took off, so on the row that I was at, there was an Afrikaans-speaking couple. Bishop was in front with the minister. I was in row 4, and then they were 3 rows behind me. Now, Tito being Tito, you say you know Tito. He has interesting views about faith and God, so they came up to life on that occasion. As the plane took off, it went straight into a whirlwind. And it went through, flapped sideways. Those of you who've flown SA Express in the July-August windy season would have experienced this. And it flapped over, and there was dead silence in the plane. The Afrikaner lady started praying in Afrikaans. Said, "Oh, foei Vader toch," and whatnot, started praying. Those at the back that were rubbishing this religion and priests, these feminists, communists, one of them in Xhosa said, "Oh, Thixo, xa ndifika undithathe bandla." And that is the hypocrisy I find in often what we articulate as feminism, as women. Be clear who you are. what you stand for, and show up authentically as that person throughout. That's my humble advice. And with that, thank you very much. Thank you, Kajan.
Thank you very much, Bab Makwana. Before we allow you to leave, I'll just ask Shenge to just come up quickly to present a token of appreciation from the forum. Prapet.
And we thought you cannot go without us presenting it to you.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. I shall read with interest.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Like they say in the scriptures, I'm not leaving you alone. I'm leaving with my brothers here. As time permits, I'm sure there'll be networking. I unfortunately have some family duties to attend to now at 1 o'clock. So with that, may I take leave? Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Bob.
Cheers.
Just for the rest of us, thank you very much for joining us this morning and this afternoon. The session is not necessarily formally over. We still have food for you on this side. And then secondly, we are encouraging that you continue to network. And then thirdly, if you have not registered your business, can you please do so at the back with Brother Moiwa and register your business on the database. And then after that, in the next couple of weeks, there'll be continuing communication on what is next around what the forum is doing. So thank you very much for taking time, and may you have a good week and a pleasant afternoon. Thank you very much.